In today's lesson, we're focusing on the theme of creation, identity, and transformation in Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. Now, last lesson, we looked at the denial of death. Frankenstein's devotion to science and its potential is an attempt to deny death. In chapter 1, Shelley makes it very clear that the psychological origins of Frankenstein's desire to defeat death lie in his experience of loss. And we can see clear links to her own experiences of loss. Shelley shows that scientific ambitions have very personal psychological roots. The reason Frankenstein wants to overcome death is because he has experienced loss. For Shelley, she writes about overcoming death because she has experienced loss too. For Frankenstein, his outlet is science. For Shelley, her solution is literature. Now, on the right-hand side, we have a quote from Ernest Becker. All power is in essence power to deny mortality. And Ernest Becker is someone who thought about death a lot. In his Pulitzer Prize-winning book, The Denial of Death, he argues that human creativity and heroism are all a product of our fear of death, of dying with no meaning. And we're going to think about what extent this theory could be applied to the creativity and heroism of Victor Frankenstein. On the right-hand side, we have another quote about death, this time from Epicurus. So death, the most terrifying of ills, is nothing to us, since so long as we exist, death is not with us. But when death comes, then we do not exist. It does not then concern either the living or the dead, since the former it is not, and the latter are no more. This thinking about death is very different to how Frankenstein thinks about death. Epicurus says that death is irrelevant to us, because when we're dead, we won't be alive to understand it, and when we're alive, we can't understand what death is. But Frankenstein is trying to overcome death because he has had close experiences with death around him. So we're really thinking about a number of things. To what extent should we as human beings try to subvert natural order? Should we be trying to overcome death? Consider the number of vaccinations we have now to prevent illnesses that used to kill thousands, even millions of people. Consider plastic surgery's capacity to reverse the visible signs of aging. Consider the potential of gene manipulation to even conquer mortality itself, the Gilgamesh project. Now, the vaccination one is one that is particularly relevant to us right now. Vaccinations save thousands, millions of people a year. People dying of the Wuhan flu wouldn't die if we had a vaccination. So arguably, we should be trying to subvert natural order. But of course, there are arguments against it too. We're going to jump in to some close analysis of Chapter 3. Now, based on Waldman's lectures at Ingolstadt University about the power of modern chemistry, Frankenstein conducts experiments of his own with the goal of creating life from death. We have 3 quotes here. To examine the causes of life, we must first have recourse to death. This is a paradox. It's the paradox of needing to study death in order to understand life. It makes it sound unnatural, suggesting Shelley questions the mortality of scientists who become obsessed with dissecting the dead as a basis for knowledge. In the midst of this darkness, a sudden light broke in upon me. This is a metaphor comparing scientific discovery to light, reflecting the scientist as God, since in Genesis, the book of the Bible, God first created light. Life and death appeared to me ideal bounds, which I should first break through and pour a torrent of light into our dark world. The aggressive masculine verb choice in break through reflects Waldman's use of penetrate on page 31. Modern chemistry is reckless. The metaphor pour a torrent of light reflects the modern chemist's arrogance, portraying him as a godlike saviour figure. Graphically, we have the profile view in close-up which emphasises Frankenstein's secretiveness with his face disguised by a hood. Other images such as the cauldron and bones create an effect of witchcraft more than science. We get the sense that this is an evil type of science. Artistically, the palette is greens, browns and blacks in this splash panel. These colours are in direct contrast to his own image of scientific ambition as a torrent light. Normally, when we see images of science, they're very clinical and cold, whereas this is the opposite. Now we turn to page 37. Again, you might like to look at your book directly to see the panels up close. Frankenstein builds a new life out of death. He does it secretly, at midnight. This setting suggests he does not wish to be discovered. It also shows how single-minded obsession isolates, separating him from society. The moon gazed on my midnight labours. The personification of the moon as witness to Frankenstein's immoral activities, like nature, is judging him. It also suggests his pure isolation. Only the moon can keep him company. With unrelaxed and breathless eagerness, I pursued nature to her hiding places. Adjectives unrelaxed and breathless emphasize Frankenstein's anxiety and almost sexual excitement. The metaphor pursued nature parallels the influence of Waldman, who tells him how the modern masters of chemistry penetrate into the recesses of nature. Unhallowed damps, profane fingers. The adjectives profane and unhallowed are connected with thin. We have lots of connections to the Bible in this chapter, which really bring into the light the argument of nature and human intervention. Artistically, we have lots of black negative space, which reflects how wrong what he's doing is, how wrong his ambition and his scientific drive are. Graphically, another literary allusion. This is a biblical allusion. Jesus is in silhouette, the icon of redemption. But should this really be associated with Frankenstein as a messianic figure trying to save humanity, or as a reminder of his sin? Graphically, Frankenstein faces a skull in profile, an icon of life facing death, the natural order Frankenstein wishes to subvert. Now let's turn to page 40. Again, open the page in your book so you can see the panels clearly. The cost of obsession is shown by Grimley and Shelley. It is emphasized that scientific ambition requires singular focus and disconnects Frankenstein from awareness of time and place. Winter, spring, and summer passed away during my labours. Listing of winter, spring, and summer emphasizes Frankenstein's disconnection with time and the coming and going of the seasons of rebirth and maturation. He is singularly obsessed with one thing. I did not watch the blossoms, sights which before always yielded me such supreme delights, so deeply was I engrossed in my occupation. The emotive diction delights emphasizes the happiness Frankenstein felt in the past. Shelley emphasizes through this loss that scientific inquiry to penetrate nature might increase man's intellectual understanding and power to change nature, but it can decrease the pleasure he takes in nature. Is new scientific discovery worth sacrificing the simple joy in the beauty of blossom? He is unable to live in the moment because he is obsessed with preventing his future. Graphically, we have the juxtaposition of panels in terms of palette and content. Pink and purple contrast grey, black and brown. Flowers contrast bones. New life awakens around Frankenstein, but his world of death persists, despite his creation of new life from death. But is his failure one of science or one of parenting? Graphically, there are flowers with skulls and reproductive organs. They're a symbol of death. It reflects Frankenstein's subversion of nature, natural reproduction, by creating life from death, or might simply illustrate how death is a part of the natural cycles of life. Graphically, the high angle makes Frankenstein more diminished, reflecting his sense of failure. Page 41. Frankenstein finishes his creation, but is disgusted by the results. Rather than being the beautiful new life he imagined, the creature is hideous. This reflects his failure. Results are not always the same as hopes. It was on a dreary night in November that I beheld the accomplishment of my toils. One of the most famous sentences in Western literature. Dreary describes the grim weather, but also reflects the lack of pleasure Frankenstein now experiences in his creation. Spring is normally the season of new life, and it's no coincidence that Frankenstein's monster comes to birth in November, the end of the year, when everything is dying. This isn't the beautiful new life he hoped for. By the glimmer of the half-extinguished light, I saw the dull yellow eye of the creature open. Half-extinguished light contrasts the torrent of light experienced in the new excitement at his discovery. This half-extinguished light is real. The torrent of light was all in Frankenstein's imagination. Contrasting the real with the imaginary, Shelley illustrates the disconnect between reality and imagination, and therefore the limits of human power. I think this also reflects his lack of hope. In the beginning, his hope was bright and joyous. Now it is half extinguished. Graphically, we have moment-to-moment closure. Remember, this is when something happens between the panels and we get a sense of movement. This creates a zoom across the 3 panels, first capturing the hideousness of his body and then the unnaturalness of the open eye. This closure draws out the tragic results of Frankenstein's subversion of the natural order. Artistically, the diagonal composition and skeletal form of the creature emphasizes his unnatural quality and the tragedy of his creation. He still looks like he belongs in the grave, from which Frankenstein stole the body parts to make him. Your task is to choose another panel in Chapter 3. Identify the context and theme. Identify and unpack how 2 language features shape Shelley's meaning. Identify how one artistic or graphic feature Grimley uses adds to Mary Shelley's meaning. Upload your slide in chronological order with everyone else's to our Google Slides.